Back in my day, when Sierra and I were just two young girls trying to navigate the world, I learned that my twin sister and I were as different as night and day. I would be up early, ready to seize the day, while Sierra would rather hide under the covers. One particular morning comes to mind. It was one of those chilly mornings when you could see your breath in the air. The sun had already started to light up our modest room, and the alarm had rung for the third time. I was up, already dressed, and reviewing my notes for our Spanish class, as I often did. But Sierra? Oh, she was still battling with the bed, trying to steal just a few more minutes of sleep. I remember calling over to her, trying to coax her out of bed. Sierra, get up. We've got our English exam today, and I know you haven't studied at all this past week. I was tying my shoes, flipping through my notebook to make sure I hadn't missed any details, while Sierra mumbled something about needing just 5 more minutes. She always had a way of trying to bargain with time. The professor won't be that mad if we're a little late, right? She muttered, her face buried under the pillow. I let out a sigh, closing my book with a sharp snap. That's not how school works, Sierra, I told her, half exasperated, half amused. I offered to go over some quick tips during breakfast, hoping to get her moving. As we sat at the table, I ran through the main points of Spanish grammar. Meanwhile, Sierra was eating absent-mindedly, more interested in her coffee than my grammar lesson. Remember, Sierra, I said, trying to keep her attention, the subjunctive is used to express wishes, uncertainty, or emotion, like in that sentence we always mess up, I hope he comes soon. Sierra just nodded, clearly more focused on finishing her coffee. She said she'd try to remember, but then added, but you know I'm terrible with verb tenses and all those other grammar goddesses. I hate writing and all those things you love. I could only shake my head and chuckle. When we finally got to school, you could cut the tension between us with a knife. I walked straight to the front of the classroom, ready and confident, while Sierra slunk to the back, hoping to avoid the professor's gaze. Just as we sat down, she leaned over and whispered, "See, I told you he wouldn't be upset about us being late." But I barely heard her. My focus was already on the exam in front of me, each question a challenge I was eager to tackle. I read through each one carefully, answering with precision and speed, my preparation showing in every response. When I got to the part where we had to describe our family using at least 5 adjectives, I thought, this is going to be a breeze, and I filled in my answers with enthusiasm. Meanwhile, poor Sierra was struggling as if she were facing an impossible riddle. I could see her frowning at the paper, her mind clearly elsewhere. She never could understand why we had to know all these rules when we already spoke English every day. I could almost hear her thoughts as she glanced around, hoping for some kind of miracle. Looking back now, I realize that Sierra and I balanced each other out. Where I thrived on structure and rules, Sierra sought freedom and creativity. And maybe that's why, despite all our differences, we needed each other so much. I remember that day so clearly, watching Sierra during the exam. She looked around, her eyes darting from one side of the room to the other, probably hoping someone else was struggling just as much as she was. Eventually, her gaze settled on the clock, silently willing time to pass faster. When the time finally ran out, I turned in my exam with a satisfied smile. I knew I had done well, I could feel it in my bones. But Sierra, she handed in her paper nearly blank. I could see the mixture of relief and despair on her face as she did, knowing it was over but also fearing what her performance meant for her grade. The bell rang, and we headed out for recess, walking under the shade of the trees that bordered the schoolyard. While the other students ran around and played, Sierra and I walked slowly, side by side. I could feel the weight of what had just happened hanging between us. Sierra's worried expression said it all. She finally broke the silence that had fallen since we left the classroom. "Grace, I'm really in trouble with this grade," she said, her voice tinged with panic. I can't stop thinking that I'm going to fail because of this. I did so poorly on the exam. I turned to look at her, feeling a sense of relief myself now that the exam was behind us. But seeing the fear in her eyes, my own sense of calm started to waver. Well, what do you want to do, Sierra? The exam's already been turned in, I said, trying to stay calm. But I could hear the concern creeping into my voice. Sierra bit her lip, hesitating. Then, she finally revealed what she had in mind. I was thinking, what if you could retake the exam for me? I can talk to the professor, make up some excuse, say I was feeling unwell, and ask to retake it. You could go in my place. No one would notice. Her eyes were full of a strange mix of hope and fear, pleading silently for my help. I raised my eyebrows, caught off guard by her suggestion. Sierra, that's cheating. And what if we get caught? Besides, I have no reason to take that kind of risk for you, I said, shocked that she would even suggest such a thing. The thought of deceiving someone, especially a teacher, never sat well with me. It just wasn't in my nature. But when Sierra saw my hesitation, she quickly sweetened the deal. She said, I'll give you that blue pearl necklace you love so much. Just this once, Grace. Please. I promise I'll never ask for anything like this again. She took my hands in hers and looked at me with those pleading eyes. For a moment, I could see the genuine desperation on her face. I sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and concern. All right, I finally agreed. But just this once, Sierra. And you have to promise to start studying more. I mean it. No more pretending to listen in class. A few days later, there I was, wearing one of Sierra's typical blouses and with my hair styled just like hers, sitting nervously in an empty classroom to retake the exam. My heart was pounding like a drum, but as soon as I picked up the pen, the answers flowed easily. The teacher watched from his desk, not a hint of suspicion in his eyes. When I finished, I left the classroom and met Sierra waiting by the school entrance. When I told her that the exam score had been one of the highest, I saw a look of pure relief and happiness wash over her face. She hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, I knew I could count on you, Grace. No one can ever know about this. As we walked home side by side, I couldn't help but reflect on what had just happened. I'd always dreamed of being a writer, of telling stories that could touch people's hearts. Maybe accepting to take the exam for Sierra was a sign of how passionate I really was about languages, more than I had imagined. Even though I felt a heavy guilt for deceiving the teacher, there was a small part of me that felt fulfilled by being able to use my writing skills, even if it was in such a deceitful way. It was a strange, conflicting feeling, like tasting something bitter and sweet at the same time.
It had been 20 years since that English exam, and Grace and Sierra's lives had taken completely different paths. Grace had dedicated herself more and more to her writing, dreaming of becoming a well-known author. Meanwhile, Sierra had drifted away from her studies, immersing herself in parties and social events, always looking for the easiest way through life. Tragedy struck the sisters when their parents died in an unexpected car accident. This devastating event marked the end of their sheltered youth and the beginning of their struggle to survive in the real world. Without their parents' financial support, Grace and Sierra had to leave the family home and face adult life on their own. Always smart and determined, Grace found a small apartment to rent in a modest neighborhood. With just a few belongings and her father's old typewriter, she spent sleepless nights turning her experiences and emotions into stories and poems. Writing is the only thing that keeps me sane, Grace would murmur to herself as she wove narratives in her little space, the dim light of a table lamp illuminating her early mornings of inspiration. On the other hand, Sierra took a very different path. Attracted by the allure of status and wealth, she soon married a wealthy man, a successful businessman who brought her into a world of luxury and extravagance. Sierra, ever the practical one, saw marriage more as a beneficial transaction than a union of love. Life is so much easier when you find someone to pay your bills, Sierra would comment to herself, satisfied with her choice, as she dressed for yet another night of social events in her spacious room. One rainy afternoon, the sisters ran into each other by chance at a bookstore. Grace was there doing research for a new book project, while Sierra was shopping for the latest trendy novel.
Grace, how are you? Still trying to make a living off writing? Sierra asked. She looked at me with a skeptical smile, holding a high-priced book that I knew she'd never read. I felt a pang of pity and disdain for my sister's superficiality as I stared at her. I write because I have a passion for it, Sierra, I said, gripping my manuscript tightly. It's not just about money. It's about creating something real, something that lasts. Sierra laughed, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Passion doesn't pay the bills, Grace, she said. I hope you figure that out before it's too late. I've learned a lesson since our parents died, she added, turning to continue her shopping, leaving me alone among the bookshelves. That night, as I returned home, Sierra's words echoed in my mind, but they didn't disturb my focus. One day, my stories will show everyone who I am, I thought. And maybe, just maybe, Sierra will understand their worth. As the rain gently tapped on the window of my modest apartment, I sat down to write another chapter.
Several months after their meeting at the bookstore, Sierra's life took an unexpected turn. Her husband, weary of watching her waste her days on trivialities and her nights at social events, began to pressure her to find a job. In her room, Sierra pondered her husband's insistence on this job matter. I don't understand why he's so fixated on this job thing, she thought. Now he wants me to be an editor at his friend's ridiculous company. I don't know what to do. Sierra was still reeling from the idea of having to work in a field she wasn't familiar with. She quickly thought of a solution she had used before. Sierra hurriedly arranged a meeting with Grace at a quiet cafe, far from the prying eyes of acquaintances.
On a quiet morning, Sierra sat across from me at the table, her expression serious. Do you remember the English test we had in school? Sierra began. I need your help with something similar again. But this time, it's even more important. I promise it will be the last time. It's for a job interview. I just need you to make sure they hire me. Her voice was filled with urgency. Over the past few months, struggling to pay the rent and manage my finances, I felt a mix of indignation and despair. Sierra, this isn't right. I can't pretend to be you. What if someone finds out? I argued with a trembling voice. Sierra acknowledged the gravity of her request, but she was determined. I know it's a big ask, but I'll make it worth your while. I'll give you enough money to cover your overdue rent and a little extra, Sierra said, pulling an envelope from her bag and placing it on the table. This is the last time. If you help me get this job, my husband will stop complaining. It's an editorial position. You understand what that means. I'm sure you can handle it. Under the weight of overdue bills and the constant threat of eviction, I felt the burden of decision on my shoulders. I took the envelope, feeling the thick paper between my fingers, and sighed deeply. All right, Sierra. I'll do it. But this really is the last time. I hesitated, knowing that this was beyond my usual principles. Sierra, relieved, spent the next hour detailing everything I needed to know about the publishing house, the type of job, and even her usual attire and mannerisms. Make sure you look confident and talk as if literature is your passion. Remember, you're the Sierra everyone expects, Sierra instructed, and I took careful notes. After the meeting with Sierra, I walked down the crowded street, each step filled with doubt and anxiety. My heavy bag, not only carrying the money but also the weight of a decision that went against my own beliefs, felt like a leaden anchor. Am I really doing this? Pretending to be my sister for a job that's not even mine? I asked myself, the weight of the decision heavy on my heart. Money was a pressing need, but the thought of deceiving someone deeply troubled me. The day of the interview arrived all too quickly. Wearing a dressy blazer like Sierra's, but keeping my naturally wavy hair as it was, I felt like an intruder in a place that wasn't my own skin. Just be Sierra now, I told myself, mentally scolding myself as I approached the reception. Mr. Travis welcomed me with a dignified posture and a warm smile. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Sierra. We've heard a lot about you from your husband. He mentioned you might be a bit of a challenge, but I took that as a joke, he said, observing me with a light laugh. I smiled gently, playing my role while reflecting on how Sierra's husband had described her. I hope not to disappoint you, Mr. Travis. My voice was calm, a stark contrast to the reputation of Sierra's voice. Inside, I was nervous but made every effort to appear composed and confident. During the interview, I spoke about literature. My passion was so genuine that it reflected not just deep knowledge, but a true love for books and the art of writing. Literature is more than words on a page. It's a window into other lives, other worlds, I explained, each word reinforcing the image of an intellectual and dedicated woman. I was a far cry from the impulsive and superficial woman Sierra's husband had described. Mr. Travis, clearly impressed, couldn't help but wonder if his friend had exaggerated about Sierra. You seem exactly like the kind of person we need on our team. I'll go ahead and say you're hired, he declared, extending a firm handshake. Despite the joy of securing the job, I felt a pang of sadness at the realization that my true identity was being replaced. Thank you, Mr. Travis. I'm honored, I replied, deeply unsettled by the reality that Sierra would be credited for my efforts. As we were finalizing the contract, Mr. Travis asked for Sierra's official documents for the company's records. I hesitated, taken aback, before I managed to respond. Oh, I brought the wrong bag today. I'll definitely bring the documents tomorrow, I quickly thought up, my heart pounding with the stress of the impromptu lie. Of course, there's no problem, Travis said with a friendly gesture as he bade farewell. Just bring it when you can, Sierra. If you meet all the expectations you've set during today's interview, you'll become a very important figure within this publishing house. As I stepped out of the publisher's building, I was torn between the relief of landing the job and the anxiety of being entangled deeper in a lie I might not be able to maintain for long. What have I done? I kept asking myself, the weight of my decision growing more real with every step. I rushed back home, hoping to distract my restless mind from the growing list of worries. The phone rang, and I answered it to hear Sierra's excited voice on the other end. Grace, I don't know how to thank you. My husband is thrilled that I got the job. We're already planning a celebration. Oh, and don't worry. The promised money has already been transferred to your account, Sierra chattered on, overflowing with gratitude. Holding the phone to my ear, I felt a mix of relief and regret. I'm glad it worked out, Sierra. But you need to figure out how to take this job on soon. I don't know how long I can keep this up, I said, my voice trembling with hesitation and concern. Sierra immediately reassured me that everything would be sorted out and hung up, leaving me alone with my conflicting thoughts, and the uneasy promise of money, though necessary, did nothing to ease the weight of my conscience.
The next day, the reality of the situation became even clearer for Sierra. On her first day at the new job, her straightened hair, her posture, and her demeanor did not escape the keen eyes of Travis. In the hallway of the large publishing house, he approached her and said, "Sierra, I'm so glad to see you so enthusiastic about this new challenge. But is everything okay? You seem a bit different today. Your demeanor is more subdued, and your hairstyle has changed." Sierra, startled by the need to maintain the lie without Grace's preparation, forced a smile and replied, "Oh, it's just first-day nerves. You know how it is. But I'm really excited about this opportunity." Later, in Travis's office, he handed Sierra a document outlining the expectations for the new literary project. "We need an outline for the novel we're developing. Given your clear passion for literature, I believe you'll bring a fresh and engaging perspective to this," he explained, his eyes sparkling with anticipation for the new and exciting work. Sierra, feeling that each of Travis's words was pushing her deeper into a hole, barely managed to keep her composure as she nodded and accepted the challenge. But as soon as she left the office, she rushed to her sanctuary, her own space, and picked up the phone, dialing Grace's number.
Sierra's voice trembled with urgency as she said, "Grace, it's a disaster. I've been asked to write an outline for a novel, and I have no idea where to start. Please, can you help me with this too? I'll pay whatever it takes. But this outline has to be perfect. All the credit will be yours, I promise." Hearing Sierra's desperate tone, I felt a wave of frustration and sympathy. "Darling, this has gone too far," I replied, my voice filled with seriousness and concern. "But I understand the situation. I'll help you. However, you really need to think about how you're going to handle your role there. I can't keep pretending to be you." Despite feeling increasingly trapped by the web of lies, I knew I couldn't abandon my sister, as family bonds remained unbreakable. In my small apartment, I sat at an old desk beneath a dim lamp, casting a faint glow in the shadows. The computer screen illuminated my focused expression as I typed out the first few lines of the novel outline. Each word was carefully chosen to not only meet Sierra's demands but also connect with the true passion for literature that I had always harbored. I became deeply immersed in the development of characters and the unfolding plot beneath her nimble fingers. This could truly become something special, I thought, feeling a moment of pride in the story coming to life from her hands. After hours of intense work, I finally completed the outline. I reviewed it, made minor adjustments, and ensured every element was perfect. With a sigh of relief and satisfaction, I attached the file to an email, adding a simple message to Sierra. "Here is the outline. I hope it meets the publisher's expectations. Please confirm receipt." As I clicked the send button, a mix of relief and anxiety washed over me. I knew I had done a good job, but the situation with Sierra remained an uncomfortable source of stress.
Meanwhile, Sierra was in the publisher's office. As soon as she received the email from Grace, she opened the document. She scanned the outline with a critical eye, and finding the quality satisfactory, printed a copy to present to Travis. Submitting it was a mix of nerves and anticipation. "Here is the outline, Mr. Travis," Sierra said, trying to mask her relief with a layer of professional confidence. "I managed to complete it sooner than expected." Travis, impressed by the speed and quality of the work, turned the pages with growing interest. "This is excellent, Sierra. Let's present it to the partners tomorrow. If they approve, you'll be able to develop a full story." "I'm quite impressed," he said, his eyes shining with the prospect of new editorial success. Back in her office, Sierra reflected on Travis's words. She knew she couldn't handle the entire story on her own and realized she would need Grace's help again if the project was approved. "Maybe I should start thinking about how to convince my husband to pull me out of this job," Sierra thought, worrying about the escalating web of lies. She was aware that she couldn't keep up the pretense for much longer without it being discovered.
Meanwhile, I was spending my days deeply immersed in her book project. My apartment was cluttered with piles of notes and books, and the table was constantly covered with papers and coffee cups. Despite the financial difficulties, I found joy in the simplicity of my daily routine dedicated to the art I loved. At night, I would take time to read by candlelight, finding a quiet solace that eased my often troubled mind. Yet, the shadow of Sierra's dependence on me as a writer was ever present. It reminded me of the frighteningly thin line between helping my sister and losing myself in my own desires.
A few days after submitting the outline, Sierra was called into Travis's office. He greeted her with an expression of unmistakable enthusiasm and praised her work without hesitation. "Sierra, the outline you submitted is outstanding. Our partners are convinced we have a potential bestseller on our hands. Now, we want you to develop the full story. I'm excited to see where you'll take these characters," he declared, handing her a folder with feedback and notes for the next stages of the project. Sierra, while pleased with the praise, felt a growing pressure of expectations, knowing deep down that she lacked the ability to meet them on her own. Realizing that she didn't have the necessary skills to fulfill the demands alone, she decided to seek out Grace.
When Sierra arrived at my modest apartment, she found me immersed in my world of words, surrounded by manuscripts and books. "Grace, I need your help again," Sierra said, her voice tinged with urgency. "The outline was a success, and they want a full story now." "I want to make this official all at once," Sierra added, her voice carrying an air of determination. As Sierra hesitantly suggested, "I'd like to hire you as a ghostwriter." I was taken aback, my eyebrows knitting together in surprise. The thought of crediting my work to someone else while continuing to provide it was something I found difficult to accept. "Sierra, I'm not sure about this. This is my work, my art. I'd hate to see my dream realized under your name," I expressed, frustration and disappointment seeping into my voice. "But think about it, Grace. This could be a chance for you. You'd get paid to write what you love, and you wouldn't have to worry about the pressure of being published as the author. I'd handle all of that. Please, consider it," Sierra persisted, trying to make the offer sound appealing despite the ethical and emotional concerns. After a lengthy discussion and Sierra's relentless persuasion, I reluctantly agreed. "All right. But I want to do it my way. I need to maintain full control over the creative process," I stated firmly, determined to keep at least some integrity in my work. With the contract settled, my small apartment became a chaotic mess of paper and notes after hours of writing. In the whirl of creation, I paused for a moment and saw Sierra trying to contribute her ideas. Though those ideas fell short of the depth the novel required, I felt a genuine affection for Sierra despite using my talent under her name. I knew such moments of sisterly understanding were rare and precious. "Let's take a photo together, Sierra. I want to remember this moment when we're working together." "Opportunities like this don't come around often," I suggested with a soft smile. I wanted to capture that memory, that rare moment of sibling connection, despite all the challenges. Sierra was surprised by the suggestion but touched by my sentiment, and she agreed. "Of course, that's a good idea." We stood amidst the clutter of paper and books, and I held out my phone to take a selfie. The click of the camera captured the moment, preserving the bond of collaboration and family. In the days that followed, I immersed myself completely in writing the novel. Sierra's visits became less frequent, and I took advantage of the solitude to deepen the complexities of the characters and intertwining plotlines. I worked late into the night, driven by a passion for the craft and a desire to see the story completed, even if it was under Sierra's name.
Meanwhile, at the publishing house, Travis invited Sierra to a meeting to discuss the progress of her novel. Sierra was acutely aware that she couldn't provide concrete details, and her anxiety grew as she made her way to the office. "How's the novel coming along, Sierra?" Travis asked, looking at her with a steady gaze. "I'm looking forward to the finished piece. Last time we spoke, you mentioned it was nearly done." Sierra's voice trembled with unease at first. "Oh, yes. It's going well. I'm just making the final tweaks to the plot and delving deeper into the sub-characters," she said, trying to sound convincing. Yet, her response lacked the confidence she had shown during the interview, and Travis didn't miss it. Travis nodded, though he harbored a hint of doubt about Sierra's hesitation. "All right, I look forward to it. Please send the complete manuscript as soon as possible," he requested, his expression a mix of encouragement and a touch of caution. After the meeting, feeling the weight of the pressure, Sierra rushed out of the publisher's office and called Grace.
Sierra's voice was tight with urgency when she asked, "Grace, Travis is starting to doubt. He wants the complete manuscript right away. How's it going? Are you almost done?" In the midst of working on one of the most crucial scenes of the book, I took a deep breath before responding. "Don't worry, Sierra. I'll have everything wrapped up by tonight and send the file first thing tomorrow morning," I assured her, trying to ease her concerns. Sierra expressed her relief and gratitude before ending the call. As the line went dead, I returned to her work with renewed determination. I knew that the next day was critical, not only for Sierra's career with the publisher but also for the integrity of the story I held so dear. The following day, after a long night of revisions and final checks, I sent the completed manuscript to Sierra's email address. I watched the progress bar with bated breath, not looking away until the screen displayed "Sent." At that moment, the story I had poured my heart and soul into was no longer in my hands, ready to be sent out into the world under another name.
Meanwhile, Sierra, anxious to receive the file, quickly printed and organized the pages, preparing to present them to Travis. Walking through the halls of the publishing house with the manuscript in hand, Sierra felt a strange mix of pride and imposter syndrome. When she arrived at Travis's office, she handed over the documents with a nervous smile. "Here's the complete manuscript, as promised," Sierra said, trying to appear as confident as possible. Travis, with a nod of approval, thanked her for the submission and promised a thorough review in the coming days. He and his team of editors delved into the novel, analyzing every line with heightened scrutiny. Surprisingly to Sierra and with relief for Grace, who awaited news from a distance, the work passed through the review without any major changes. It was a rarity in the publishing house's history for a first draft to be so well conceived and executed. At the conclusion of the review, Travis called a meeting with the entire editorial team. With everyone gathered, he spared no praise for Sierra's work. "This novel is a shining example of literature that touches the soul and the mind," he declared. "It's the first in our history that didn't need corrections after the first review. Congratulations, Sierra, on this extraordinary achievement. We're excited to launch this story in the coming days." This announcement generated enthusiastic applause from everyone present. While Sierra smiled and accepted the applause, she felt increasingly uncomfortable with the praise. She knew that the real talent behind the success was working in her apartment on personal projects and away from the spotlight now shining on her. The following week, the book was launched nationwide. Bookstores displayed large posters with the novel's attractive cover, and Sierra's name was on all the headlines and interviews. The success was immediate and resounding, with positive reviews and readers eager for more from the promising new author. During a meeting in the publisher's luxurious office, Travis informed Sierra with an encouraging smile, "You've been invited to appear on one of the country's most watched TV shows. It will be an excellent opportunity to promote the book. You need to be prepared to talk about the work, showcase your charisma, and demonstrate your full potential as a writer. Everyone will be watching."
My apartment was a world of quiet, a stark contrast to the storm of events in Sierra's life. Scattered papers on the table were evidence of me immersing myself once more in my literary world. "Grace, I need your help again," Sierra began hesitantly as she crossed the threshold. "I've been invited to a TV show. It's a big opportunity to talk about the book, but I can't do it alone. I need you to go in my place." Holding a cup of tea as I sat on the table, I looked at my sister with a mix of surprise and contemplation. Sierra, this is just making things more complicated. Do you really think I can continue doing this? I'm not you, I replied with a voice tinged with worry and a hint of irritation. I had resolved not to impersonate Sierra again. But knowing my weaknesses, Sierra made an offer I knew would be hard to refuse. Grace, if you do this for me, I'll fund the publication of your own book. You'll finally have complete freedom, and your talent will be recognized. Plus, I'll be in the audience, disguised, cheering you on. Sierra, aware of my dream of being published as a writer, had used her trump card. After a long silence, with hesitation and hope intertwined, I decided to accept the enticing offer that could change my literary career. On the day of the interview, as I prepared to style my hair in waves and get ready, I picked up the book I was to bring to the show. Before putting it in my bag, I opened the book to the first page, where a photo from when we had worked on the manuscript together was tucked. On the back of the photo, I had written words capturing the essence of that moment, quietly recalling my complex feelings towards my sister. Though I never revealed these words, I carried them as a talisman. A symbol of my connection with Sierra, even in the toughest situations. To appear effortlessly like myself and in comfortable clothing, I took a taxi to the studio where the show was being recorded. Upon arrival, I was warmly welcomed and guided backstage by Travis. Sierra, you'll do great. I know you'll shine, he said with an encouraging smile. I simply nodded, feeling the weight of the character I was about to portray once more. Kevin Davis, the show's host, was renowned for his ability to make interviews engaging and captivating. As the theme music of the show played softly in the background, I was called to the stage. Bright lights and the applause of the audience enveloped me as I stood in front of the camera. Good evening, Sierra. It's a pleasure to have you here tonight, responding to the many requests from viewers. Your book has captured the hearts across the U.S., Kevin began with his charismatic smile. Tell us, what was the inspiration behind this wonderful story? Did anything from your childhood influence it? I maintained my composure and answered carefully. From a young age, I've always had a passion for literature. Books were my best friends, opening doors to worlds beyond imagination. I believe each story I read planted the seeds that eventually blossomed into this book. The interview continued, with Kevin praising the sweetness and sensitivity of my responses. I answered quietly, without justifying others' actions. I believe everyone has the right to their own opinions. And on the internet, people sometimes express their thoughts more intensely. I focus on the positive side and strive to remain true to myself and my readers. My mother often told me, Grace, be yourself and don't worry about those who try to hurt you without reason. Inadvertently, I called myself by my real name instead of Sierra's. It was a fatal mistake that nearly exposed the twin charade. Immediately, Kevin interjected. Wait, you mentioned you were called Grace. So, is it Sierra just a stage name, or do you have two names? And the audience, I'm sure, was eager to know the reason behind the mix-up. Everyone wants to know more about the life of a great writer like you. I felt a wave of anxiety and quickly devised a convincing excuse using my wordsmith skills. Actually, Grace was the name of the protagonist in a childhood story of mine. I didn't bring the sketch about her because I lost the manuscript. While Grace was crucial to my development as a writer, she was, believe it or not, just a character in a larger story. Among the audience, the real Sierra, disguised in a hat and sunglasses, was aware of the irony of the situation. Sierra, often blunt and outspoken on social media, was a stark contrast to the sweetness I projected to the crowd. Therefore, the audience couldn't recognize the woman on the screen. Moreover, Sierra was worried that the mistake with the name might cause further trouble. Let's hope everyone buys into Grace's story. But please, no more slip-ups today. Otherwise, we'll have to talk later. During the live interview, the atmosphere was charged with excitement and anticipation. Kevin Davis, ever attentive to details that could enrich the conversation, leaned forward with genuine interest in Sierra's literary work. "So, did you bring a copy of the book for the audience to see today?" he asked with a smile. I was a bit nervous, but I managed to stay composed, nodding affirmatively as I carefully retrieved the book from my bag. Holding it high for everyone in the studio to see, a respectful hush fell over the room, followed by warm applause. However, during that moment, an unexpected item slipped out of the book and landed on the floor with a small thud. My heart raced as I instinctively bent down to retrieve it. From the audience, the disguised Sierra immediately recognized what it was. It was a photograph of the two of us that I had used as a bookmark. Sierra was struck by a quiet panic, fearing that this small mistake might reveal the entire charade. Kevin, curious, reached out to help. "What's this?" "It looks like something fell out of the book," he said, grabbing the photograph before I could stop him. He hesitated for a moment, clearly surprised, as he looked at the photo of the two sisters. He instinctively turned the photo towards the camera and read aloud the words written on the back. "Beyond any disguise or deception, we remain true sisters." The signature, clear and unmistakable, was beneath the words. The studio fell into a state of confused silence. As the camera focused on the photo and the phrase, I turned pale. Words escaped me as I struggled to come up with an explanation. The audience and Kevin waited with questioning gazes, clearly eager for answers. Kevin turned to me and asked directly, "Tell us the truth. Are you lying to us? What's your real name?" Sierra, unable to hide from the potential disaster, suddenly stood up from her seat and tore off her disguise. "It's all her fault. Grace is always a mess and irresponsible," she shouted, pointing at me on stage. Her voice was a mix of anger and despair, as she tried to deflect attention from her own disappointment by focusing on my flaws. Still standing next to Kevin, I felt the weight of the accusations and critical stares directed at me. Desperately trying to salvage the situation, I stared directly into the camera and then at the audience. A firm resolve was forming within me. Yes, that's right. This is a photograph of my sister Sierra and me. No matter what happens, I have always valued our relationship. Yes, I am Grace, the true author of this book. As I spoke, my voice grew stronger and more resolute. My confession stirred up a commotion in the studio, with the audience murmuring and the production team scrambling to handle the unexpected turn of events. Kevin Davis, clearly taken aback, tried to maintain his composure on air. "This is quite a surprising development," he managed to say. The cameras continued to broadcast every moment of the confession live. In the midst of the chaos, Sierra, her disguise exposed, fled the studio in dismay. Her career and reputation seemed to crumble around her. Meanwhile, I stood firm, ready to face the consequences as my truth was finally out in the open. Who knows, I might just start rebuilding my life with my true identity. After the shocking revelation on the television show, a heavy silence settled over the studio. I took a deep breath, facing the camera with newfound resolve. As the initial shock rippled through the audience and viewers at home, waves of support began to rise. Kevin Davis, regaining his composure, was the first to voice what many were beginning to feel. "This is truly an act of bravery, Grace. In a situation like this, it's rare to find someone who accepts the truth with such sincerity." In the following weeks, the story of Sierra and me spread like wildfire. Newspapers, TV shows, and blogs reported every detail of the literary scandal. They constantly highlighted the courage I showed in reclaiming my work and the disappointment caused by Sierra's actions.
On social media, people were pouring out their admiration for Grace. Meanwhile, Sierra was facing a storm of criticism and public condemnation. At the same time, Sierra's personal life began to unravel. Her husband, upon learning the truth, was furious and confronted her about the lies. The lies had tarnished not only her career but also affected his reputation. The betrayal of trust was unbearable, and he filed for divorce. Sierra found herself isolated amidst the chaos she had created.
When I arrived at the publishing house, the weight of the fear of dismissal pressed heavily on me. But to my surprise, Mr. Travis was waiting in the office, his expression serious. Instead of the dreaded termination, he began speaking with heartfelt sincerity. "Grace, we deeply value your integrity and talent. We would like you to continue working with us and write your next book under your own name. You are the writer we need to move our publishing house forward." Relieved and moved by the trust shown, I agreed to stay with the publisher. However, I made a request to lighten my conscience. "Thank you for your trust, Mr. Travis. I have one request. Could you add my name as a co-author to the already published books? I don't want to completely ruin my sister's reputation," I pleaded. I hoped this gesture would slightly mitigate the impact on Sierra. Mr. Travis, understanding and respecting the complexity of my feelings, agreed to my request. "Of course, we will make the changes as requested," he confirmed. With that understanding, I was ready to focus on the new chapter of my literary career. Now fully acknowledged and supported, I was prepared to shine under my true identity. During this turbulent time, I completed my first book under my own name. The work was a profound exploration of redemption and the complexities of human relationships, receiving praise from both expectations and critics. The publication of that book marked a symbolic moment of independence and success for me. As my career blossomed, I also reflected on the lessons learned and the price paid for my integrity. In an interview, I shared my thoughts. "Truth is often more complex and painful than the lies we tell. But living in truth gives us a peace that falsehoods can never provide. It is challenging, but it brings a deep sense of fulfillment."
Sierra now lived in a modest apartment, far from the luxury she had once been accustomed to. She was distanced from the cameras and lights that had once illuminated her, her world shrinking to a bitter reality. Surrounded by newspaper clippings reporting her downfall, Sierra nurtured a sense of indignation as a talisman against her humiliation. She refused to acknowledge the true cause of her misfortune, blaming Grace and the world for her betrayal. "Why me? Why did no one? I was the victim of it all," she would often mutter. She couldn't bring herself to accept any responsibility. Yet, despite her desire to reclaim her lost status and seek revenge, Sierra became increasingly isolated. Former acquaintances and friends drifted away, and attempts to reconnect with the literary world were met with cold, disdainful responses. The market and public that once admired her now shut their doors, trapping her in a cauldron of resentment. In a life that grew increasingly modest and simple.
1 year after the scandal rocked the literary world, I was back on Kevin Davis's show. This time, I was there as myself, recognized and celebrated for my true talent. As I entered the studio, the lights shone as brightly as before, and I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. In contrast to the shocking silence of my previous appearance, I was greeted with warm applause from the audience. Kevin extended his hand with a friendly smile. "Grace, it's wonderful to have you back. I'm so happy to welcome you under such happy circumstances," he said, guiding me to the center of the stage. I not only wore my own clothes, but also carried with me the confidence of overcoming great adversity. I expressed my gratitude with a sincere smile. "Thank you, Kevin. It's truly wonderful to be here again and to be myself," I said. During the interview, Kevin and I talked about the success of my recent book. The book had captured hearts with its honesty and emotional depth. "Grace, Your book not only became a bestseller but also inspired many people to pursue their passions sincerely. How do you feel about this? Kevin asked with genuine interest. I reflected on my journey and shared my emotions with the audience. It feels surreal, Kevin. This past year has been like a roller coaster, but every challenge was a valuable lesson. Above all, I'm grateful to share my true voice with the world. My words resonated with gratitude and wisdom, echoing through the studio. They touched everyone present and those watching from home, reinforcing my image as a writer with a grand persona and remarkable resilience.
And so, another story comes to an end. If you enjoyed this story, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. These small actions help us continue to share inspiring stories with you. Also, take a moment to watch the video currently displayed on your screen. We sincerely appreciate your support. Until next time.